Welcome, Michael Brown. It's nice to have you on the Ad podcast, and um, we haven't gotten a chance to meet in person, but it's nice to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Michael, you work at Microsoft currently, and can you tell us just a little bit about what you do there?
Oh, yes. So I joined Microsoft about 3 years ago, and I'm in the CSE org, Commercial Software Engineering. And what we do is help our customers with their cloud adoption journey. That entails like designing, architecting, giving advice on approaches to bringing a solution from inception to pilot to production.
Nice. So helping the newcomers to the cloud. Just curious, like what kinds of challenges do organizations have moving to the cloud?
So we typically work with, like very large customers. So their challenge is volume. So they're pushing the cutting edge of what we're doing. They're looking at newly released services or services that aren't even necessarily released yet to find out how to best implement a solution using Azure.
So one of the things that you're known for, at least recently, is your starting the Juneteenth Conference. And let's say before we talk about specifically Juneteenth, that it's an opportunity for people to learn about technology from Black software developers or people in tech. How did that coincide with your journey into tech?
Oh, yes. So I was, I feel fortunate in that, I was raised in Chicago in the 80s and single parent home and, not necessarily middle class even. The school system there isn't really well funded, and it's easy to fall through the gaps in that environment. I'm definitely like a poster child for quote unquote at risk youth. And it's through technology that I was able to forge my own path and create a career that I never dreamed possible. And so I've always felt that I felt not obligated, but I felt impelled to pay it forward and help the next young man or young woman, in a similar situation to realize that there's more out there than they're being told. The thought isn't lost on me that my name coincides with a young man in St. Louis who was killed by a police officer. And he was actually looking to go into a career in technology. And so, I used to always say I need to help the next Mike Brown find their path. And it is almost like too spot on with that event occurring.
Yeah, that must have been really difficult. So let's go back to just before the Juneteenth conference began, and it would be, I don't know how anybody could forget about the horrible event at the end of May 2020, where George Floyd met his death at the knee, of a police officer. And well, again, it would be difficult to forget the outrage that caused. And so sort of on the heels of that, or right in the midst of a lot of that, you said, okay, here's our opportunity to do that. Can you tell us sort of about your feelings around that time and maybe your inspiration for this?
Yes. So there was a confluence of events for what led to me starting Juneteenth. So my grandmother, who gave me my first computer, passed away the day after Mother's Day that year, and so that was very somber. And I thought about like a lot of what she told me growing up and the lessons that she instilled in me. It was also June 2nd was my first anniversary at Microsoft, and so I was reflecting on that and what my next steps were. it's been a lifelong journey for me to get here. I went about it in a roundabout way. And then I happened to be sitting down and watching Blackish that day, and it was the Juneteenth episode that they were airing at that time. And it occurred to me, I'm like, okay, well, Juneteenth is coming up. I need to do something to commemorate it. And, that's when I said, okay, well, let's create a Juneteenth conference. We need this. And of course, like, it was also influenced by the tragedy, and that's a euphemism kind of saying it's the tragedy of George Floyd's murder. So all of that came together at the same time, and I said, okay, well, we need this. We need to celebrate, and that's in the spirit of Juneteenth. It was a celebration of being told a year later after the Emancipation Proclamation that the slaves in Galveston, they were announced, hey, you guys are free now. And so, like, a year later, they celebrated the anniversary of being told they were free. And what I feel is that even though it was a celebration, it was also a recognition that, there was a much further journey, a longer struggle to get to where we need to be. I think it's still ongoing to some degrees, as evidenced by the events that keep occurring. But it was also a recognition of the journey so far and the achievement of progress. So I thought that was the perfect tone to use for a conference, as a celebration, as a recognition of achievement, and then an acknowledgement that we still have a longer journey to go, but let's recognize that we've done so much.
So for listeners who aren't familiar with Galveston, he's talking about Galveston, Texas, which is very close to Houston in the United States. And he's referring, of course, back to the freedom of Black slaves from slavery in the United States. And so, of course, you probably want to inform yourself of the history of that if you're unfamiliar with it. But you can imagine what it's like to, be set free. You're going to do some celebration, right? Maybe, in a similar sense, you were able to start this conference, with the idea of benefiting young Black men and women, teenagers even, to start on a path of going into technology. So with very little time, you put together this conference, on this kind of like inspiration of all the, like you said, this confluence of events that occurred in your life, and boom, you do this. And well, first of all, Michael, how'd you find all these Black speakers?
So I posted on Twitter. I said, hey, here's my idea. I'd love to do it this year. At first, I was actually thinking, okay, well, it's not enough time to put it together. Let me just start the ball rolling, and we might be able to do it the next year. But then I stopped and said, hey, let's take the shot. Even if we get like 3 or 4 people to talk, and it'd be a great thing. And so I practice lean startup, which says, hey, get a minimum viable product out. And my minimum viable product was an ugly sign-up page that I threw together on MailChimp, and said, okay, sign up. I gave them a checkbox to say, do you want to speak? Do you want to volunteer? Do you want to help set up the platform? Because I had no idea how we were going to host it. And then I announced inside of Microsoft. So an interesting thing is that CSE was formed from developer platform evangelism. So it's a bunch of people who know about putting together events. And so there was one colleague who actually has a conference platform for doing exactly that, hosting a conference. So that was solved. Like within an hour, I said, okay, we have a way to do this. Let's go. And then I got over 1,000 people who registered and expressed some kind of interest. Like, I want to attend it. I want to help design it. I want to volunteer. I want to speak. And I'm like, okay, well, that sounds like a resounding yes from my customer discovery. There's a market there. And so it was short time. It was very rapid. And so I put in all of my project management skills to work to allow the team to, agile development, self-forming teams. I said, hey, here are the areas we need to work on. Sign up for what you want. And then rather than me being like down in the details in the tactical area, I let the team select a representative. So like we did a scrum of scrums where we did a daily stand up and said, okay, hey, here's what's on the agenda. Here's what we need to do. I had some excellent team members who were just very good on the tactical stuff. Like you give this amorphous blob of like, hey, we need to do user registration. We need to do social media. And they just broke it down into like detailed tasks, and it ran like a machine. I think there was like a week into it, I realized like I could like step away and this will happen. And it was just amazing, like so much enthusiasm, so much energy. It was, I was just humbled to be a part of it, really.
And a very significant part of it. So thank you you followed what you wanted to do and your inspiration, and you didn't back down. And that's exactly what tech people need to do, right? I mean,
right.
Probably to a lot of kids looking into this industry, they see it as impossible to get in. How could they possibly do this? And what it takes is intestinal fortitude, right? And you're just going to get it done. And it doesn't mean that you're a genius. It means you're smart and have a lot of drive and you don't give up easily, right? I mean, doesn't that describe a software developer?
Yeah, what just popped into my head when you say you're smart and have the drive, like Joel Spolsky called it smart and gets things done. That's the two priorities for software engineers. And because of the length of my career, I've been doing this for like 27 years now. I've learned to, strengthen my skills that are outside of pure coding. So, I have a definite product mindset where it's like, okay, the code is great. Like if I had spent a bunch of time just saying, okay, I'm going to build up this portal site rather than like, oh, here's one that's handed to me, it wouldn't have happened. Right. So, I think understanding what the product is and understanding how to bring that to market is the textbook agile development product mindset that brought it to reality in 2 weeks, literally.
Yeah, excellent. And having the other tools, right? It's like, okay, how are we going to get this done? And so there's integration involved as well, right? Mm-hmm. So your friend, your colleague who helped you with the platform, I mean, there was a learning curve there. And, even if that individual took care of everything, so to speak, well, still people who were joining in had to learn it, and a lot of coordination. And the Scrum of Scrums, well, that may be the best use of Scrum I've ever heard. Really, really truly benefiting people. So you had a 2021 conference.
Yes.
As I understand it, the initial one, and I think this is, sort of normal. There was this sort of overwhelming. What did you have? 20 hours of speakers, and
So we started off with 1 day, one track, and we were targeting to fill like 4 hours. Even the greatest moment for me was when I had submitted a talk for the conference, and I said my talk doesn't cut the mustard. I prefer to hear other people speak and share their information. So I was like, I tweeted out, I'm like, I'm proud to say that my talk wasn't accepted at the first Juneteenth conference. But we started off with 1 day, 4 hours, and we got so many good talks. Like we had a team to review them that we had to expand to a second track and then to a second day. And so like all of the talks are quality. We had 3 keynote speakers, one for the start and end of the first day, one for the start of the second day. And, these were phenomenal people. We had Danny Thompson, we had Angie Jones, and Jerome Hardaway, who, have done amazing things on their own. Like Angie is the Java queen, among other things. She has like 25 patents, stuff like that. And I had like at the time like 1,500 followers, and that she said, "Yeah, I'm going to sign up and talk at your conference." I was like, "What?" So, like I said, it was really a humbling experience to be able to be the impetus behind such a great gathering.
Well, that's very cool, and it's nice to hear you have these fond memories of it. So you had you had about 20 hours of presentation during the initial 2020, and you said about 8 hours in 2021. So maybe
Right.
even a bit more manageable, but that's still a lot of hours for a virtual event. And now you've already got things kicked off for 2022.
Right.
That will happen in June. Tell us about that, and then just where are you going in the future?
Yeah, so I've been keeping my eye toward doing an in-person event. And of course, when I thought about where to host it, if possible, it would be Houston, because Houston has one of the largest Juneteenth celebrations. It's about an hour from Galveston, where the original Juneteenth was celebrated. I was really hoping we could do it this year, but I was worried still about COVID. I've seen some examples of COVID-friendly conferences that put in guidelines and security and safety measures, but I still wasn't comfortable doing it. Especially Texas has been really lax about their COVID policy. So we put that on hold. We're going to do it virtual this year as well, but we're already strategizing on securing a place and getting funding to host it in person next year.
Nice. I hope that works out for you. So, I hadn't really thought of asking this, but have you seen any sort of direct traceable results from the conference actually helping young people?
So a few of our speakers have gotten follow-up engagements on the strength of having their name blown about with the conference. Like one speaker, Brittany Braxton, I had people from within Microsoft say, "Hey, we loved her presentation on journaling as a developer, and we love her to present it to our group." And I was able to intercede there and make the connection. And her talk was phenomenal again internally. And there were other cases I don't want to necessarily reveal, because they didn't necessarily make it public. So I don't want to necessarily tell people's names without their permission ahead of time. But yeah, I've seen its impact.
Excellent. It's good to see that. And, just a little experience from my side. I have on different occasions tried to help young Black people who I think, would fit how you were describing yourself, at risk, right? And, what I recall is I wanted to actually start some kind of a school where there was an area in Colorado, it was kind of, well, I guess you would call it Aurora, Colorado, and there was a lot of poverty. I happened to be kind of, around there, and I had friends that lived there in the area. And I met some young people that kind of were in that situation in their life, and said, "Man, wouldn't it be great to just be able to teach them, something, to give them some skills to improve their future possibilities?" And, and looking into it, well, first of all, my wife, Nicole, was just pregnant with our first son. That's some pretty big news, and you're like, okay, well, I got to think of my family. And then, just looking into making this happen, virtual wasn't really a big thing at the time. And
Right.
A lot of people were still using dial-up at the time. So, that wasn't even a whisper of opportunity there. So, and it was just going to cost a lot more money than I had to invest in that. But nowadays, all these are possibilities. And I think that some of these kids are able to go to code camps, or however you define that. I think it describes well where they're trying to learn some basic skills within, 6 weeks or maybe even 6 months. And I have heard of success stories where kids are able to come out from that and that experience and actually get work. So that's good. But the one I had in mind most recently is right here near Phoenix, Arizona, north of Scottsdale. We've, I don't know why, but we've had so much trouble with our internet provider the service from them. And we had a kid come out. Well, we didn't know it was a kid. We had someone come out to help, look into the problem, troubleshoot for us. And he was a young black kid, a lot of energy, very smart, very, quick-minded and so forth. And any question that I had, it was like, boom, he had an answer. And what it sort of reminded me of was the story of Kelsey Hightower. Kelsey's story is he started out like he really had to hustle a lot to get the opportunities that he had. And I think he was actually doing like some kind of internet provider or, service for helping people with their computers or something. And then he finally got into software development. So I showed this kid, I went to Kelsey's Twitter account, and I showed him like how many followers he had and how well he had done. And I said, if you want to try to get into software development, let me know. And I think I gave him my card or something, wrote my phone number on it. And I never heard from him. I'm disappointed because I would have loved to introduce him to, some channel, but you're hitting a big area, where people have the opportunity to really hear a lot about this. So yeah, it's really cool what you're doing.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is the representation, and that's what I'm most excited about is that, we were able to, not just in the amount of time we did, but period, create a conference where the entire speaker lineup was Black, and it gives a lot of representation to say, hey, I can see myself doing this. If you don't see yourself represented in a career, it's harder to see yourself in that career. If you don't see yourself there, you won't see yourself there, basically.
Yeah, you have to be able to see examples in the industry of people who started out in the same way that you're going to have to start out, right? That they are going to have to start out. So, yeah. Okay, let's sort of shift gears here. Actually, I had heard of you before, and I'm certain it was around the Juneteenth conference is probably the first opportunity that I had to, learn about you. Although our paths didn't, or our virtual paths didn't cross until I think it was like September, October of 2021. You gave a talk in at a Southern California DDD meetup.
Yeah.
And so I got excited when I saw this advertisement because it like took me way back. Peter Code came up with this idea. What a name, right, for a software developer.
Right.
Peter Code, not spelled like CODE. I think it's like COED or something.
COAD.
COAD. Okay.
Yeah.
Peter Code, and anyway, so he's the one who invented the TogetherSoft UML tool and developed this idea around color modeling or modeling in color.
Right.
Right. And so you did this presentation. I was like, what? This is like old school stuff. So I want to go hear about this. And I had, didn't actually know a lot about that at the time. I was using UML, and it doesn't matter what people think about UML now, but I thought it was a pretty useful modeling language. So anyway, take us down the path of color modeling or modeling in color.
Okay. So it's interesting. Again, my life is full of confluences. So as I first learned about domain-driven design around 2008, my employer at the time had David Anderson come and give basically a mentorship. He was there for like a week working with our teams and helping us really dive deep into agile development. And, he taught us about lean software. And of course, I knew him from, he was the author of the original TFS agile template, agile process template, I think it was called. Like he was involved in bringing that. And I worked a lot with TFS at the time. So like one day he gave a presentation on color modeling and just gave us a tour of like, okay, well, first there was the data model resource book, which basically breaks down like so many domain models, but really deeply like mapped to a database schema. So ERD. And then he talked about David C. Hayes' book, the Data Modeling Patterns of Thought, which was also like a really good deep dive into, hey, how do you compose a data model? And back then, data model and domain model were interchangeable. They weren't just talking about just pure SQL objects. They were talking about entities that are deeply represented. And then finally, he touched on color modeling and introduced me to that book, Java Modeling in Color with UML, which, it just sounds like if you said, hey, you're going to learn about this really new domain modeling technique using UML, like people will probably look at you side-eyed right now. Like I think to some degree we threw the baby out with the bathwater. Like people say Agile is, like, oh, we don't need documentation. I'm like, well, I mean, before I write code, I do pseudocode, like explain my algorithm in plain English. That way, like when I'm deep in the weeds with implementation, I have a roadmap to say, okay, well, I implemented this step. Now let me step back. Where was I? I don't have to look around. I have a roadmap. Oh, next I'm going to do this. In the same regard, I think, doing an object model, even if it's just stickies with the name of the class and drawing a connection between them is worthwhile, because it helps you think about the domain, think about the higher level without it. What Peter Code in this book presented was that, okay, there are 4 archetypes for a domain model, and those are a person, place, or thing, or an actual entity, a role that entities play, descriptors. At the core were what he called moment intervals. I think he was trying to avoid the overloaded terms in technology. I look at them as entities and transactions. So that's the core of a system, and making that the central idea of what you hang everything else off of. It really expanded my mind on how to design and how to model objects. Like so many times, like he was giving an example and walking through, he actually took apart a project that we were working on. And so we had been in it for like 3 months or so. And in 15 minutes, he questioned us and said, okay, well, it sounds like you need to do this. Do you have this entity? And we're like, no. Well, or yes, but he was actually like predicting it without us even asking. I'm like, okay, I need to learn this. And so like I spent like the next month or so just diving into the book, tearing it apart, asking more questions. Like I saw like one case where they said, oh, an account is an entity. I'm like, well, this account sounds like it's a transaction because it's ongoing, it's open and has transactions following up. And you're like, yeah, that's a good way to think about it, And so I really dove into that, but also I felt I sensed the connection between color modeling and domain-driven design. And so I saw, like, for example, the bounded context. I noticed that like a role can play the root aggregate for a bounded context. It's like, oh, I'm a customer, and here's, I want to make a purchase. I want to, all of the thing that goes in with being a customer, with the customer being the aggregate root. And that's what I realized was that the role archetype plays an engine of the system. That's where all your, normally when you're learning object modeling, you say, oh, the object is the noun and the function is a verb. Here we have the event and transaction, which are represented as nouns, but the functions all sit on the role. So like make a purchase or request a return or so forth and so on. I started like trying to map those two together. And then like when the idea of event sourcing came along, okay, well, hey, here's your event right now. It's represented right in this archetype.
Yeah, very very intuitive, I think. And I think when you learn the colors that are used to represent, your eye, and hopefully, well, this doesn't work so well maybe for some who have some kind of color blindness, right?
Right.
But actually, even for people who have some color blindness, they usually have some sense of color. And so anyway, you see these objects or elements, modeling elements, and there's like this sort of immediate visual impact. They tell you what they are. And so part of the identification of what's being represented in the model just jumps right out at you, right? So
right.
Yeah.
Because it adds another dimension. And I think he did a good job at selecting the colors. So like rather than red, he picked pink. So people with red, green, color blindness aren't impacted, and he picked like neon colors so that like, there's red, green, and then there's I think yellow, blue color blindness. And so like rather than blue, he selected a pastel like sky blue. So I think it even, like every nuance was thought of in that system, and like you said, like you can like almost look at the model at a glance and say, you're missing a pink here, you're missing a yellow here. Who are you like implying or eliding here?
Now, fast forward, let me think here. When did I start learning about that? Maybe, I think Together Jay came along maybe like, I don't know, 1997, 98 in there. I don't know, somewhere like that.
Right.
And the modeling in color was probably right near that time, shortly after. So let's say fast forward about 10 to 15 years, somewhere in there,
right.
Maybe 12 years like that. And here I am on what we called my IDD tour, right? Implementing domain-driven design tour. And I invite Alberto Brandolini to join, in I think it was at least two of the events that I had. And so he joined me in Belgium, Leuven, Belgium, first of all, and then in Krakow, Poland, secondly. And then actually I taught through Alberto's company, not exactly as an IDD tour event, but, right in conjunction with the same kind of time frame down in Bologna. And he first introduced what became event storming at the earlier Leuven event. And I think that was like early April of 2013. It was just right after my Red Book was published. And, there was, we definitely lit a fire in this small DDD community at the time, and really, I think had a major impact. So Alberto introduces this, what became event storming, and it uses different colors of sticky notes, right? To represent different parts of not just a domain model, but actually multiple domain models potentially that are represented in a timeline left to right. So, okay, so now we have color and color modeling, with UML, and then we have sticky notes for event storming. How do you see those two things overlapping?
Oh, yeah. So I met Alberto, and I did a conference in Ukraine, actually. I think it was the Build Stuff conference in Ukraine back in, I think it was 2017. It's interesting, with the events going on. I did like a tour of Chernobyl, and the conference was in Kiev. So I have that was my first trip across the ocean. So I have a definite affection for Ukraine and definite angst about this invasion that's going on. But my talk at the conference was on color modeling, and I presented it there. And, like that was the first time I learned about event storming, because just before, in the same room as my talk on color modeling, Alberto talked about event storming. I'm like, wow, that's definitely very similar. And I think the color modeling concepts influenced what became event storming. I think he did a great job at making it fresh and consumable and bringing it in a way that the audience was ready for. We were already thinking about event sourcing and DDD, and he just rephrased it and recaptured it, which is amazing. Like it takes real talent to be able to make an old thing new. That was the theme of the conference. Old things are new. So like I focused on the UML aspect. I think, like I said, at the end of the presentation that Dave Anderson gave us, he actually used stickies to like reposition and draw out the concepts. I think definitely like the concept of a string, like a continuous timeline flow of events that's talked about in the color modeling book. Like you have a moment interval, and then you have predecessors and successors. So before you can have a shipment, you need to have an order and maybe a payment, like a payment for that order. And so I think the process that he talks about, where it's like, okay, let's just look at our events and lay them out in a timeline and then hang the rest of it off of there is brilliant. I think it's a really good tool for discovery, just like color modeling. I think they're not in conflict with each other. It's a how versus a what. Both of them tell you how to do domain modeling and how to discover and come to a common ubiquitous language.
Well, and another thing to think about too, I do know that some of the colors that are used in event storming are not necessarily that colorblind friendly as modeling in color, but what I came up with was, because I had, like some people attending my workshop were colorblind. I said, what can we do about this? Well, I just created some simple icons that you can draw very quickly on the side, like in the upper corner, like upper left corner of the sticky note that represents like a lightning bolt for the event. And the command is like an exclamation point. And, view is pretty easy to show. It's just a rectangle or a square with a little upside down T on the bottom of it or something like that. So, and what's a policy? Well, I just draw 3 lines to represent a document. And that way, if someone's colorblind, they just look at the icon and, they pick up on what the concept is. In fact, we've carried that over into our new tool called Domo Roboto, which is basically online virtual, team-based event storming, context mapping from DDD, and a number of different things, impact mapping with user stories and, so forth. So anyway, a very visual modeling tool, and it seems to have worked out quite well. Now, you've already touched on how, there's this overlap with domain-driven design as well. Maybe you have more experience with that and the overlap with color modeling?
Oh, yeah. So it was a definite obsession with me of like cracking that nut. And I actually worked on a project where the lead architect for the system, like me, was a heavy proponent of DDD, but also leveraged the concepts of color modeling, as a utility for basically creating consistency and a consistent approach across the team. And so that was a beautiful project. We had about 10 teams in different bounded contexts. I was the tech lead for one of those context teams, and we were using a service bus to communicate in events to cross the boundaries. Like totally disconnected. Like I couldn't like reference directly any other upstream or downstream services. And like we talked about, hey, how does this color model for this component map to DDD concepts? And we did dive into like building the bounded context around a given model. Like we did use event aggregate routes. When the component pulled a message off the bus, it would only talk to its route aggregate. So like we made sure to start making it where, okay, like, oh, this delivery request needs to go through the aggregate route for the delivery system. I need to like pull them out all together into like just a big old brain bump because they're all still floating around in my head right now. But yeah, there's so much that for me, domain-driven design gives you a
kind of a shared vocabulary, right? So
yeah. So it gives you the what. I think that color modeling gives you the detailed how to implement that what.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe that. Cool. Okay, now maybe one more big topic, or I don't know how much you want to say about extended reality, but you've gotten into this idea of extended reality, and frankly, I don't know anything about it at all. So, here I am, your student. So could you tell us about extended reality?
Oh yeah. So I've been like following the concept. I really feel like, the next step in mobility would be some kind of glasses. Like Google had a shot at it. It was a little too early. The tech wasn't there. I've been seeing some patents come across that are like, okay, well, this looks like this is going to be into like maybe like plastic glasses or really thick, bottle glasses that people used to wear, but it'll be glasses. There won't be a headset so much. So I think that's the next phase. I've been following mixed reality, Microsoft HoloLens, the Apple MR API and stuff like that, but I never really dove into it. And then like my wife for Christmas bought me a Oculus, and I was like sold. It's like so amazing. So I started seeing like there's possibilities for really creating. Like if you remember Second Life back in the day, where like it's like, oh, you build a second life in this world. I think that's closer to reality, and the headsets aren't where it's at. But when we get to the stage where glasses are an everyday thing powered by maybe your phone for a little more juice, I think that we will be at a phase where, the second life becomes more commonplace. So like I started diving into it. Where things get interested is you have XR encompasses augmented reality. So like having like a heads up display instead of looking at your phone for driving directions. They'll be right in your face. Thinking about, seeing a person and having facial recognition on your glasses, and they're saying, oh, this is Bob Johnson. He's in your contact list. His wife is Andrea, and, his birthday is August 15th. The possibilities are there where it's not just fun and games, but it's actually context sensitive information at the moment you need it without looking at a screen. The screen is, right in your eyes. I've seen some prototype patents where they're trying to do some kind of visual enhancement via contact lens. So I see like 10 to 15 years at the most where this is just an everyday thing where, we have information when we want it, when we need it. And that's why I'm really excited about XR.
So, yeah, I still don't really, I've never even tried something like that as far as I can remember, but quite interesting. But like you say, when I see them, I'm always just a little bit like, well, I don't know. I don't feel like rushing out and getting them right now. So I probably won't be an early adopter, but, I'd probably need a few influences in my life that would say you really need to do this. What do you think about the privacy implications of this? That's always sort of, what crosses people's minds is, okay, how much of my personal life am I giving up to use this device?
Right.
You could just be going to dinner, and do you really want people to know that you're going to dinner right now and where you're going and who you're meeting there? And I mean, not that anyone would even have a reason to be concerned for that, but what could bad guys learn from that?
Yeah.
So
yes, that's definitely a concern. And like Facebook hasn't been the most honest player when it comes to privacy, or, well, I wouldn't say dishonest, but they haven't done privacy well. And, they're the forerunner in this whole extended reality world. But, like we see Apple, we see Microsoft making plays in it. We see all of the big players who are there are going to make a next level play. When you mention like, oh, I don't necessarily want everyone to know that, I went to that restaurant last night. I think it enters the same realm of social media, right? If you don't want them to know, don't check in or do whatever that gesture would be to say, hey, I'm here. In the same regard, like we have to also think about how the users might share information about their network that the other person might not want to share, So like you're in my social network and I see you at dinner. how do I say, oh, I don't want other people to know I'm here, But yeah, those are definite concerns, and there's going to be a whole new realm of privacy concerns going forward from there. That like a lot of the use cases of social networks have to be rethought or reconsidered when you talk about, okay, well, I'm not pulling out my phone, I'm just wearing glasses, and I don't necessarily want to share everything that my glasses pick up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are definitely uses. It's just, this whole new landscape of devices and so forth. I have to say, I mean, you go back far enough, I'm sure, to remember, just answering machines and touch-tone phones and landlines and all this stuff. I mean, I haven't owned a landline since we left Colorado,
Right.
Almost 6 years ago. And we were questioning then, why should we even have a landline anymore? And, things like that. But, there were real advantages to just not having a phone on you all the time.
Right.
I mean, some people get so addicted to always connected that it just detaches them from real life. And I've had those kinds of challenges too. It's like you just always want to be updated about, okay, what's going on here, what's going on there. You have people that you work with, you're trying to help them, they're trying to help you, and it's like, could you put that down and take your next bite of food and and then talk to me? So yeah, there's that aspect, and like you say, okay, I run into Michael Brown at a restaurant, and he's just trying to have a private night out, and I go and like take a selfie or something and put it up on Twitter or wherever, and go, look, I'm at the same place with Michael Brown. You're just like, sigh, I just wish I could have had a nice quiet evening and not run into anyone that I know, or
Right.
But they didn't have this capability to put me under peer pressure to take a photo with them that I really didn't feel like taking a photo. So, I think just for one thing, we have a lot to learn about etiquette with
Right.
these devices and technologies.
Yeah. I think I can definitely see what you're saying there, because sometimes you just want to like interact with the person. It's like there was a comedian who said, you go to a school recital and everyone's standing there with their basically looking at their kids through their screens, and it's like your kid is right there in live high definition. Look at them, and then you look at Wall-E, where they show the two people in their little cart strolling side by side having a conference, and Wall-E looks between them and he's like, you're talking to a person that's right next to you. And it reminds me when I was in college, and it was before, like we were still on Unix in college, and there are people in the same room having white talk conversations with the person like 5 feet away. It's like, there's this thing called talking. Have you heard of it? So, yeah, like I think in some ways technology disconnects us more than it connects us, and it connects us a lot. It's like, remember as kids having pen pals, it's like, okay, well, I can talk to like instantly to someone in China instead of writing the letter and waiting for 2 weeks for them to get it and send it back. So it's cool how well connected the internet has made us, but in some regards it has disconnected us.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're not going to solve all this sitting here chatting, but I would like to talk with you about it more and see what kind of progress you've made in that area. So I really appreciate you joining us today, Michael. And so how do people contact you if they want to join in the Juneteenth, future conferences and so forth? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Oh, yeah. So, we created a Twitter. All of our social media is Juneteenth Conf. That's June with TEENTH Conf, all one word. And it's JuneteenthConf.com, Juneteenth Conf on Twitter, Juneteenth Conf on Instagram, and Juneteenth Conf on YouTube and Facebook. And we'll be putting up the announcements for call for papers and ways to volunteer.
Excellent. So what I would like to see, and maybe even in some way contribute to, is how could we get a kind of like high school level inspirational talks, maybe just a few of them, and maybe you've already got those, I don't know, but how can we get those actually piped into the schools where the kids are? And since a lot of them are learning from home anyway right now, maybe it's not that difficult. Have you worked through that at all?
Well, so actually, we just had an event last Friday through Microsoft. I'm on the BAM ERG, Blacks at Microsoft, and we host for now virtual Minority Student Day. And basically, what it is exactly what you said. We target school students with we had a keynote speaker, Marseille Martin, and we had a few workshops that tied into what she was talking about. Basically, the theme was, what is your legacy? And so we got the kids to think about, hey, what mark do you want to leave on the world? And we also showed a virtual museum of young Black people who are entrepreneurs or making big waves at a very young age, to do exactly what you said, provide some inspiration directly to the young students. I would like to, beyond just the one conference, I would like to expand, the activities and programs at Juneteenth Conference to a year-round thing. I've got some ideas around there, and that just takes funding to some degree.
Yeah. So, well, a very interesting, compelling, and laudable effort that you're involved with, and I wish you all success with it. And I'm never going to be able to be a Black person in tech, and but I'm with you in heart. So thank you so much, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Vaughn. It's been great meeting you. I'm a huge fan of your work, and it was amazing to have you reach out to me. And
likewise. So, okay, take care.
Have a great